From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, for the last few weeks, we've been speculating, would the Labour Party suffer splits? Was the direction Jeremy Corbyn was taking the party in going to lead to it being thought of as the nasty party? That's what we've been debating. And today, Frank Field has resigned the Labour whip, and he will sit as an independent MP. Why? Well, he's resigning the whip, he says, because the party has become a force for anti-Semitism. It has overseen an erosion of our core values with a culture of intolerance, nastiness and intimidation. He goes on to very personally criticise Jeremy Corbyn by saying the latest example from last week comes after a series of attempts by Jeremy to deny the past statements and actions by him were anti-Semitic. This, if you remember, the comment about Zionists and that British-born Zionists didn't get British irony. He goes on to say, Britain fought the Second World War to banish these views from our politics, but that superhuman effort and success is now under huge and sustained internal attack. He then goes on to talk about his local party in Birkenhead, where he describes the behaviour of some Labour members as thuggish contact. They have legitimised appalling levels of bullying and intimidation. So there are two reasons that Frank Field has given for standing down as a Labour MP to be an independent, resigning the whip. One is the perception that Labour is now a racist party, anti-Semitic party, and two, that there's a culture of thuggery taking place within the constituencies. It's a party that he says he doesn't recognise. Does this matter? Well, on the other side of the argument is the fact that he, of course, has been voting consistently for Brexit. It's something he feels very strongly about. This was Frank Field speaking during a debate about the European Union withdrawal bill back in November.
The Lordship should know that if they try and wreck this bill, then many of us will push the nuclear button. Our side of the House wants to see the House of Lords go. I'm surprised there wasn't a cheer at this point. That it will be, they will sound their own death knell. Not one of them is elected, and none of them have any standing whatsoever in preventing the government inviting the House of Commons to implement the referendum decision.
Well, that was Frank Field back last November. My own view, I think Frank Field is a significant political figure. In an age when our respect for politicians has diminished hugely, he is one of those people who, when he stands up to say something, people listen. And they do so not wholly on partisan party political lines. They do so because he has interesting things, thoughtful things to say. You know, you can go right back to 1997-98, and there he was, you know, a junior minister looking at welfare, saying to Tony Blair, we've got to think the unthinkable, we'll have to raise the pension age, we'll have to do things, otherwise we simply can't afford to go on the way that we are. He's had the courage to talk about immigration, something that's been a very difficult thing to do from within the Labour Party. And he's also thought that Brexit ultimately was the people's decision, and that we should treat it as now being in our national interest to make sure we make a success of it. And 9 months ago, I made this comment on LBC about Frank Field.
Frank Field urged the Prime Minister to follow the example of Winston Churchill back in the 1940s. Expressing his concern at the government's handling of Brexit, the former Labour Minister claimed that there has not been the sense of importance or drive or coherence that this issue merits. Hear, hear, I say to that. Having branded himself as a reluctant Brexiteer, Mr. Field added, anyone serious about comparing this historic event to us fighting for our survival in World War II would have followed the move that Churchill made once he took over from Neville Chamberlain. He would have moved from the ramshackle way of existing institutions, and he would have established a war cabinet. Isn't that actually rather fantastic? That Frank Field, veteran Labour MP from Birkenhead, was talking there, not as a Labour MP, not as somebody who was part of a political tribe, but somebody saying there is something more important than the colour of the rosette you wear at election time. It is the national interest, and the country has voted for Brexit, and people should come together, whichever party they're from, and fight to make sure we get the best from it. I have to say, Frank Field, 10 out of 10.
Well, there's my view on what Frank Field was saying about how Brexit should be approached, that we should have effectively a modern-day war cabinet to sort it out. I've got huge admiration for him. I think it's very, very bad news for the Labour Party that he said the things he said today, that he's going. I think there'll be a lot of moderate Labour supporters out there who will say, well, you know what? If that's what Frank Field thinks, there must really be a problem. Now, he has been supporting the government over Brexit. Several times during the EU withdrawal bill, the government just about crept through their votes because they had a handful of Labour MPs voting with them. Frank Field was one of them. The Birkenhead Labour Association did not like that, and they passed a motion of no confidence in him. And in response to this, you know, a Labour source told the Press Association, Frank has been looking for an excuse to resign for some time. Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman said Jeremy thanks Frank Field for his service to the Labour Party, but he was in trouble with his local association. He may well have been facing potential deselection, although as a man who's been MP for the constituency since 1979, and with a Labour majority in that seat of 25,000, they would have really been stirring up a hornet's nest if they had deselected him. But there are some will say he jumped before he was pushed. Some will say this is not significant. I don't agree with them. What do you think? Does this demonstrate that the Labour Party is in crisis? And if you think, no, it's just one individualistic MP resigning, it doesn't matter, Labour is strong and it's united, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, yep, there are real concerns here. This is a very deeply respectable Labour figure. This is going to hurt them. Text to 84850. And if you're a Labour voter, do you think more people may well follow now in Frank Field's footsteps? Let me know by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course, watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Let's go to Mike, who's calling from Newham. Mike, hello.
Hey, Nigel, how's it going?
It's going well. Are you a Labour supporter, Mike?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah.
OK, so how do you view Frank Field's resignation?
So I think, ultimately he jumped before he was pushed. His CLP wasn't happy with him, and they filed a motion of no confidence, which passed. And so I'm all for member-led democracy, and so I'm glad he decided just to leave, to be honest.
Okay.
The same that he used the issue of anti-Semitism and stuff, when he was about to get kicked out for propping up the government.
So he was about to get kicked out, Mike, for standing up for the Labour Party manifesto that was put before the electorate last year, because it very, very clear, wasn't it? Jeremy Corbyn could not have been clearer. The Labour Party were going to take us out of the European Union and out of the single market. The manifesto couldn't have been clearer. All Frank Field was doing was standing up for that.
No, actually, to be honest, I actually kind of half agree. I accept the result of Brexit. I don't want a second referendum. I think, the most of the shadow cabinet. But the thing is, we had a chance to take down Theresa May, and he decided to vote with her. So
taking down Theresa May, tribal politics matters more than honouring your promise to the electorate in a manifesto?
Well, how are you going to get those promises when you're still at it without taking down the leader of the government?
Right. No, I get the logic that you have to get them out and get you in to put your policies in place. And I do understand that, Mike. But it does seem to me that all Frank Field did was stick with the Labour manifesto. The rest of the party have treated it with certain disregard. How do you respond to the other charge that that Field makes about thuggery? I mean, what he's implying, Mike, is that there's a new group of people in the Labour Party who are behaving in a thuggish, unpleasant manner. Have you seen that?
Well, I mean, it's no surprise that these MPs who have had seats for years and have not been accountable at all to the members don't like member-led democracy, and they'll pass it off as thuggery or hostility, when in fact, you know, a lot of the PLP don't actually represent a lot of members. The
Parliamentary Labour Party,
let alone the public, and that's why Labour went to the wilderness for years, because they didn't represent the working class. And now all these members are getting involved and saying, actually, we want these kind of people to represent us. It's like what's happening in America at the minute, when you've just had obviously the rise of Bernie Sanders and. What's the girl who just
Ortiz, that's right, and she's but hey, she's not even in the House yet. Mike, let me just ask you, are you a member of Momentum?
Yes.
Right, okay, fine. So he thinks that you guys have taken over his Labour Party, dragged it to a place where the public think it's racist, and you're a bunch of thugs. That's really what he's saying, Mike, isn't it?
Well, that's the excuse he's using to basically before he jumps, because his PLP
Mike,
said they didn't want him.
Do you have a sort of farewell message for Frank Field?
Not really, mate.
Would sort of good riddance be the sort of the way you're thinking, Mike? Would that be a reasonable guess?
Yeah. Yes. Well, just good luck to him, I guess. Really
Mike, thank you very much. Well, Mike there, Momentum member who was very polite to me on the phone. Your message is pouring in. Diane says she doesn't think other MPs will follow. Amy says on Facebook they're in a huge crisis, but until they tackle Jezza, they will continue to struggle. Simon says Labour is finished. The working class got them in and they're going to get them out. Well, I don't know. What do you think, folks? He's been there nearly 40 years, sitting in the House of Commons. He's been a minister. He's been a shadow minister. He is one, I'm going to put this to you, he's one of the most respected political figures in this country today, at a time when there's very little respect for politicians. He's resigned the Labour whip today. I think this is pretty serious for the Labour Party. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusive at LBC, and it is now 7:15. Frank Field dumps the Labour Party after nearly 40 years as one of their MPs, and I'm asking you, is this a serious problem for Labour? I think it is. Others say, hey, he jumped before he was pushed. He was helping prop up the Tories by backing Brexit. But before I get back to your calls on that, a quick comment about another Labour politician, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, because this Saturday, between 9:30 and 11:30 in Parliament Square, a giant 29-foot blimp of the London Mayor will be flying for that 2-hour period, depicting him in a yellow bikini. This, of course, all in response to the blimp of Donald Trump in a nappy, where permission was given for it to fly in Parliament Square during Trump's visit to London. And a group of people have raised money. They raised about 60,000 quid to get this blimp built and flown. Mr. Khan himself has responded by saying, if people want to spend their Saturday looking at me in a yellow bikini, they're welcome to do so. I don't really think yellow's my colour, though, which actually I have to say is really quite well dealt with. If you're curious as to what the Khan blimp looks like, go to lbc.co.uk and see the Khan blimp in all its pomp and splendour. Have to say, for Sadiq Khan, who I'm not a great fan of, that was actually rather a good answer. Yellow's not my colour. At least shows a sense of humour. And other rumours circulating today, speculation about people who might stand against him in the next race for London Mayor. Maybe more on that later on this evening. Let's get back to Frank Field walking out on the Labour Party, saying it's become anti-Semitic, levelling heavy accusations against Jeremy Corbyn, and basically saying that the people that have come into the Birkenhead Labour Party are a bunch of thugs. That's pretty much what Frank Field is saying. George is a new caller from Mitcham. George, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. Now, look, I respect Mr. Frank's position as a point of principle. Whatever his views are, he's entitled to them.
Yep.
But having resigned as a Labour, no longer representing the Labour Party, he must now do the honourable thing, the thing that our democracy would expect of him, and that is to resign his seat and go by-election to seek democratic re-election, the democratic credentials under whatever he wants to call himself now.
Yeah, I mean, George, it was very interesting. If I go back just a few short years, there were two Conservative MPs who said, we're resigning the Conservative whip, we're joining UKIP, but we think, as a matter of honour, we should put this in a by-election to the people of our constituency, and they both did, and they both won. And George, you're right, because for those two to have done that, I can't remember in modern times anybody else effectively doing it. I know David Davis resigned and forced a by-election over some legal issues that he felt very strongly about, habeas corpus, that sort of thing. But generally, George, people switch parties and there's no prospect of a by-election, is there?
Well, sorry. Look, the point is this, that although he is backed by the Labour Party and he's been a Labour Party member, the people who give him his legitimacy are the electors of Birkenhead.
Yeah.
Now, also, our system works on a constituency-based system. The British democracy is constituency-based. We don't have proportional representation and all those things where it works differently in other countries, okay? So, and he's also making a very, very powerful point. He's not resigning over some frivolity, some minor technicality, So, and also he's been around for a long time. He's had a good amount of years in Parliament, and I personally would suggest to him. Now I know he's only just announced that he's got plenty of time. There should be no rush if it takes him 2 or 3 months to get around to doing it. But ultimately, it's only the only test that matters in British politics is whether the people vote for you.
Okay, George, thank you. George making the point that there should be a by-election. Now, Frank Field is not the first Labour MP to resign the whip, because a man called John Woodcock, not so well known, Barrow-in-Furness Member of Parliament. Now, he got into a bit of trouble. He was suspended from a Labour Party over accusations he'd sent inappropriate texts and messages to a former staff member. He said to his constituents, I do not accept this, but I understand the complaint must be thoroughly and fairly investigated. And then, having been suspended, he decided to go the whole hog and resign the whip, saying anti-Semitism is being tolerated and Labour has been taken over at nearly every level by the hard left, far beyond the dominance they achieved during the height of the 1980s militancy. So this happened back in July. So there are two Labour MPs who've resigned the whip now in the space of a few months, both of whom are saying the party is a haven for those who are anti-Semitic. Are there more to come? I don't know. Amy is a new caller to this show from Leeds. Hello, Amy.
Hello.
So, what do you make of Frank Field walking out on the Labour Party?
I think it's really good. I think it shows that he's principled. I am not a Labour voter by any stretch of the imagination. I'm one of those very rare people. I'm a Northern Conservative. But we hear on the doorsteps all the time that the left are fed up of momentum infiltrating the party. And as somebody who really cares about democracy and really wants to see this country moving forward, it's really nice to actually see people that are standing up for what they believe in. I do agree with your previous caller. I think that he should resign the party whip and he should resign altogether and actually put it to the people to vote.
Right.
I think that the more messages that are sent back to Westminster, especially to Jeremy Corbyn, that he can't behave like this, and it's just completely, it's scary the way that things are going. The more messages that get back to him, the more chance the Labour Party actually have of controlling their party and getting their party back.
Yeah, I mean, you're very much in a Labour area there, Amy, but you're clearly... you're clearly getting the message there too that there is a problem. Amy, thank you very much indeed. John in Bromley says, Frank Field is a great man who is too good for the Labour Party. I hope he takes over UKIP. Well, John, I don't know whether he's going to do that, but on certain issues he's got very similar views. I've always thought that Frank Field was a highly respected politician with a lot of integrity. 3 cheers for Frank Field, a man of integrity, says Jim in Lanarkshire. Frank Field is a statesman, and it's a pity other MPs haven't got the guts to follow him. Labour is falling apart. Well, there's those of you there who think he's a great fella. It's very principled, but a couple of callers already saying, that's fine, Frank Field. You can leave the Labour Party, but you ought to call a by-election. I guess a few more people might say that tonight. Let's see. John is calling from Wanstead. Good evening, John.
Hiya, Nigel. Labour is in crisis. Frank Field stood up against racism and anti-Semitism. He'll be remembered for so. The man is a man of principle. Only in the last month, Margaret Hodge stood up for it. The former chief rabbi from the House of Lords stood up for it, and they'll be remembered for a fight against anti-Semitism. There's even a petition going around where 35,600 people have said Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semite and he must go.
Yeah, well, but there isn't much prospect, John, of him going, is there?
Well, surely he's not immune to all this. We haven't heard him on radio defending all this. We haven't heard him on TV. I've heard him enough on radio state TV, but he's been on there more than he's been on LBC.
I have to say, well, he doesn't like coming on LBC, does he? No, you're quite right. John, I think he's more vulnerable tonight than he was this morning, because I do think a lot of people will say, wow, if Frank Field says those things, there must be a problem. And I think that is there. But, you know, we've had a momentum caller on already tonight saying there's no problem at all. This is a new Labour Party, and he was going to be pushed out anyway. John, I thank you. Diane on Facebook says he jumped before he was pushed. This is an individual lashing out. I've got time for Frank Field, but he knows momentum would have pushed him out. Jumped before he was pushed. And Nick says maybe all the wannabe Tories in Labour will follow suit. What do you mean, Nick? Moderate Labour MPs. I've actually seen out there on social media, you know, 1 or 2 people saying, good riddance, hooray, we're pleased he's gone. I tell you what, it's very, very foolish. I make the point again. Not many politicians are respected in this country today. Frank Field has commanded a tremendous amount of respect. Lee is a new caller from Blackheath. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening to you, Nigel. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing well. And I have to say, I think Frank Field probably has done the right thing.
I don't think. I mean, you've been kind of blowing his trumpet a bit. I don't think he is well known. I think he's a nobody in terms of, you know, what people will identify when they watch the television or they read the newspaper. Who is Frank Field? And I've never heard of him. And I follow politics quite a lot. I think, you know, I don't think he's anybody, and I think he will be instantly forgotten. I don't think he's. He may be well respected, and that's a different thing entirely. But in terms of his notoriety in and around the country, who's ever heard of this guy?
OK, no, Lee, you probably make a very good point. I've often said that, you know, if you took a photograph of Philip Hammond, our Chancellor, and took it round most of our cities, vast majority of people couldn't pick the bloke out of a lineup. Why I thought it was slightly differently with Frank Field is that he has been around for such a long time. But you're probably on balance right. It's only those that really know politics that will know Frank, or study politics that know Frank Field. But I still, Lee, I'm going to say this to you, that he, by those of us that do follow politics, he has been a respected figure. And I think what he's done today hurts Corbyn.
Well, I don't think it is, because I just like to say that I just heard the last caller say that, and I hear this word a lot, infiltrated by momentum. Now, all of the tens of thousands, indeed hundreds of thousands of Labour members that was lost under Tony Blair because they didn't think he was a true left-wing socialist politician.
Yep.
They've all come back now. I was one of them. I'm just a working-class guy, and I saw, you know, what Tony Blair was doing to the Labour Party, and thought it was despicable. So I left. And then, lo and behold, from their ashes rises.
And you're back. And you're back, Lee. You're back.
I'm not.
You've got a proper socialist leading your party. Lee, I've run out of time. It's a shame. It's 7:30. It's time for the news with Thomas Watt. Frank Field dumps Labour, but a lot of you who are Labour Party members are telling me, yeah, but actually, we were going to get rid of him anyway, because he was voting with the government on Brexit. Well, yes, folks, he was, but that was also in your manifesto that you wanted to leave the single market and the European Union. But before I get back to that issue, the government today have announced that they intend to introduce a blanket ban, they haven't yet decided whether it's under 18s or under 16s, on certain types of fizzy drinks. That's right, those that are rich in sugar and in caffeine. Brands like Red Bull, Monster and Relentless. Yeah, so not happy with putting sugar taxes on these drinks, they're now going to ban them completely. I thought the Conservatives used to believe in choice. I thought they believed in people making up their own minds. I didn't think they believed in the big, heavy hand of the state. But it seems that Theresa May, and she'll be a statist to the end, cannot resist wanting to nanny and control every aspect of our lives. I drank fizzy drinks. Doesn't mean that I'm grossly overweight, does it? And I'm sure that if kids want to drink the odd fizzy drink, but they're out doing sport and all sorts of other stuff, they wouldn't be fat too. I just, for me, it's too much government. I can't abide it. Your messages pouring in. As a Conservative voter, well, I used to be one before Theresa May. I think Frank Field is one of the very few MPs who truly deserves the title Honourable Member, says George from Luton. If Frank wants to put his views to the test, why doesn't he stand as an independent in a by-election? It'll be bye-bye Frank, says John. I was always taught to judge someone by whether you would invite them to dinner. Would you invite Mr. Field? Of course you would. He's a man of integrity, says Paul in Warwick. That's one test. I have the Farage test. I judge everybody by the Farage test. Would I employ them, and would I want to have a drink with them? And that's kind of roughly how I've gone through my life. Brian in Surrey says, not only are the people rebelling against the shambles of the two main parties, but now the politicians too. Obviously, Labour members and Corbyn fans are saying that Labour is not in trouble, but the electorate won't want to vote for Labour while Corbyn is still leader. He can't even beat the worst PM, May, that we've ever known. And that was before the general public knew about the anti-Semitism. Chris predicts that what was a tiff has now become a civil war, and Labour may not survive beyond the party conference. Don't be so sure. Actually, the one point about Labour, and we've discussed Corbyn and Labour, the anti-Semitism row, we've discussed it many times over the last few weeks, and the one thing that I'm very struck by the calls and the messages, are those of you that are Labour Party members. Those of you like Lee, before the break, who left Labour and have come back to Labour, they still, it seems to me, are pretty solidly behind Jeremy Corbyn. It's the impact all of this is having on Middle England, Middle Wales and Middle Scotland that I think is more difficult for them. Ron is calling from Battersea. Ron, good evening.
Yes, Nigel, you see, the reality is that this Conservative mob, they're going. Next time...
Sorry, Ron. So are you saying that Frank Field's a Conservative?
Well, in many ways he is, but there are some things I do empathise with him on, like the European issue, and it's a shame that will have to be sacrificed because that's the only way we're going to save the NHS and the rest of the public services.
Oh, I see. So, Ron, Ron, hang on a second. Hang on a second. So you agree with the Brexit vote, but we're going to have to surrender it, are we?
Absolutely.
Oh, right, okay. So that's really democratic, isn't it?
Well, listen, Nigel. Unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn has allowed himself to be manoeuvred by these Blairite Europhiles, and, we're just not... I can't see us getting fully extracted from Europe if Labour do get in, but they must get in, because otherwise the Conservatives will sell our public services to the Americans. And we can't allow that to happen, especially the NHS.
Will they? Is that right?
Yes, they will, yes.
So how do you know that?
Because that's their track record. They will sell
Labour, Ron, Labour privatised more of the NHS than the Conservatives have done.
I know, because we were being run by a Conservative Thatcherite Blair. He wasn't a socialist. And
You really don't like Mr. Blair, do you?
He wasn't a progressive. But anyway, let's get back onto Frank Field. Frank Field should do the honourable thing and stop being a coward and hold a by-election. He should put his money where his mouth is. If he feels that the public are so disenfranchised by the biggest progressive movement in Europe, in fact, in the West, then he should put his money where his mouth is and hold a by-election. See, the fact is, the Labour Party has regained itself. It's cleansing itself slowly but surely from Thatcherites, and it's getting back to a place where it represents the people that it was supposed to represent when it was set up.
Ron, I'm going to bring you back. To the first point you made about, Frank Field and Brexit and the fact that you actually sympathise with him, but you feel that Frank, of course, has been dishonourable and he needs to do the democratic thing and stand for election. How do you feel about this, Ron? Nigel, isn't it wonderful how Labour supporters are coming on to say that Frank Field should step down and trigger a by-election for the sake of democracy, and the same Labour Party are trying to thwart the democratic process that 17.4 million people voted for? How do you answer that, Ron?
Well, I think that Jeremy Corbyn is determined. For the sake of his integrity, I think he's hanging on to the spirit of what the vote was for, which was to leave. Unfortunately, he's been corralled, and I don't know how they've managed to do it.
But Momentum are doing it as well, Ron. Momentum want to overturn the referendum result.
Well, no, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Looks like it to me.
I'm in contact with various people in Momentum. That's not necessarily true. But it's true that they wouldn't like, the sort of Brexit that I would want, which is to get out of Europe yesterday. That's the sort of Brexit I want.
All right. I tell you what, Ron. Let's go back. I'm going to ask you I've given you a good run. One last quick question. Do you understand there'll be people out there, in this mythical place we call Middle England, but there'll be people out there who follow news and current affairs. They're not members of any party. They're floating voters. They'll know who Frank Field is, and they'll think, wow, if a gentleman like Frank Field thinks anti-Semitism is now absolutely rife in the Labour Party, they've got a real problem. Doesn't this resignation, Ron, do Labour damage with the voters?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately for them, not.
All right. Ron, we've had loads of you. You've been great. I've got to move on. Others want to have their say. That's important. Nigel is calling from Chadwell Heath. Good evening.
Yeah, hi. Just regarding Corbyn.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult to unseat him for a number of reasons. Firstly, he did better in the last election than was expected. That wasn't, incidentally, due to any great ability on his part. It was just the Conservatives ran such a rotten campaign attacking their natural supporters. That was what happened. And now it's very difficult to unseat him because Momentum, who are his natural allies, are in control of so many grassroots constituencies. That is where his support comes from. And frankly, if Jeremy Corbyn was seen walking down Whitehall, not that I'm suggesting for a moment he would, with a swastika armband in jackboots, they would simply say he's trying to reach out to the Nazis in order to effect a reconciliation. That's how ludicrous. That's how ludicrous the situation.
I'm not sure that comparison works, but it does seem that the true Corbynista will defend him whatever he says or does. I suppose, Nigel, on the other side of the argument, some would say whatever Trump does, the Trumpites support him. Do you think Labour's been damaged today, Nigel, in terms of the electorate?
I think that there is a very tiny proportion of the electorate which would be alarmed by this as one more event in a long succession of events. Our only hope now is that those Labour MPs who detest Corbyn, who view him with loathing and see him for what he is, do have the courage of their convictions as Frank Field has done and not canvass for his election as Prime Minister. We need action now.
OK, Nigel, thank you. Now, Anne sees this in a rather different light. Hi, Nigel. I think more Labour MPs will follow Frank Field because I believe he is part of a strategic plan to remove Jeremy. A cunning plan. I don't think Frank Field is part of a strategic plan. Personally, I think this is a personal decision. I do suspect that having represented the constituency for 40 years, some of the unpleasantness, the thuggery that he refers to at local level must be actually quite difficult to bear. But I think he is a person of integrity. I see him as somebody in many ways who is above the normal tribal political process. But he has been a Labour man all his life, at least until today. I think it does great discredit to the Labour Party. I know those of you listening who are paid up Momentum members think I'm away with the fairies, but it's not you that really matters, because it's not your votes. Actually, yes, sure, your leaflet deliverers and everything help, but it's not your votes that will get the next Prime Minister elected. It's people out there who haven't yet made their minds up, and they won't like the look of this. That's my view. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:45. Well, some of you, like Caroline on Facebook, think Frank Field is a true patriot, a proper politician, a dying breed. Others think that he's dishonourable and he should call a by-election in his constituency. Before I get back to that, there was an article in today's Financial Times that said Nigel Farage is weighing a bid to become Mayor of London in an attempt to push the Conservative Party into third place in the British capital. Farage responded, "I have been encouraged by a group of people to stand for Mayor of London against Sadiq Khan, but that doesn't mean I'm going to," he said. "I haven't said no to it, I'm thinking about it." And I've been bombarded all day by people, not just from this country, from America, saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, the truth is, a group of people have approached me. They say, look, there are more people in London that voted for Brexit than voted for Sadiq Khan when he became mayor. And actually, if you look at the numbers, that is true. But for those of you wildly speculating, quite frankly, I've been so busy the last few weeks, I've barely given it a moment's thought. I will give it a moment's thought over the course of the next week. I'm probably not going to do it, but I will certainly think about it. Hey, who knows? Back to Frank Field. Kevin is calling from Croydon. Kevin, has Frank Field done the Labour Party real damage? Could more MPs follow him?
He's done them damage, I think. I think he's a nice man. He's got a good record. He's looked out for the poor and the people at the bottom of society. But his take has always been, for the state to be nicer to them rather than to address the issues that put them there in the first place. So that's the kind of division between him and the left, is that he's a kind of paternalist, but people like Jeremy Corbyn want to change the system so it works fairer for everybody anyway. I think that's what most left-wingers or most low... But if people succeed in getting rid of Corbyn, I don't know what they think they're going to achieve by that. You're going to have the same people in the Labour Party being angry and probably bringing in exactly the same ideas, and you'll start getting real anti-Semitism because people will be very angry. People actually are prejudiced because of what people do, not because of what they are. If this kind of onslaught against Corbyn is successful, then you will see anti-Semitism, proper anti-Semitism, because
but Kevin,
people will be angry.
Kevin, do you understand? Kevin, do you understand why people are unhappy with many of the people Corbyn has chosen to share platforms with, and quite a few of the things that he's said?
Yeah, but it's not a secret, is it? I mean, he's been for all these kind of reconciliations with people that get called terrorists for the last 40 years. I mean, there's nothing... Oh, he's been consistent, Kevin. He's been consistent. He's mixed with terrorists and people who are against this country for almost his entire political career. And kind of that's now being seen by a wider audience than just those who follow politics every day. But Nigel, so have our intelligence services. Our intelligence services are completely tied up with these people. It's not stupid to try and actually get reconciliation so the public stop dying in the process of these conflicts. I mean, I would admire him for that myself.
Reconciliation, Kevin. Reconciliation means you talk to two sides. To my knowledge, he's not had great talks with Israel. Kevin, we're diverging. I thank you for your call, and Kevin wants Corbyn to stay in place. Scott is a new caller from Birkenhead, which, of course, is where Frank Field has been the Member of Parliament since 1979. Scott, good evening.
Good evening.
So, let me ask you, are you a Frank Field voter?
No, I'm not actually. I've never actually voted Labour purely because I don't like the Labour Party, but I've always respected Mr. Field, and I've been pretty much waiting for this to happen for a long, long time. I've always said if he stands as an independent candidate, I would always vote for him. So although I've never voted for him, that's purely because he's a member of the Labour Party. But looks like I'm now going to actually get the opportunity.
Have you met him, Scott?
I have met him when there's been an election. He's done the door knocking and he's knocked on doors and such like. And, and I've just said to him, I would like to vote for you personally, but not your party. So I have mentioned to that previously that I would.
I mean, generally, Scott, in British politics, the personal vote has dwindled away to almost nothing. Most people who vote have got no clue of the name of their MP. They're voting for the leader of the Tory party or against the leader of the Tory party. It's almost become a presidential type system. But there are exceptions to that, and I think an MP that's been there for 40 years is going to be pretty much known by everybody, and people will decide they like him or don't like him. Is it your view, Scott, if Field said, I'm going to stand down and force a by-election, do you think he might have a chance as an independent?
I think he has a very strong chance. I think he has enough support locally to win as an independent candidate. I really do. I think it'd be a great thing to happen. But I really feel that people get behind him. People do support him because he does care about local issues. For instance,
I've always had the impression with Frank Field that he genuinely cares about the country, about people, and about issues. And whether his antidote to the country's problems might be different to mine, but the fact that he genuinely is sincere about caring, I think, has always come throughout his whole career. Scott, great call. Thank you. Hi, Nigel. Who is Frank Field? Is he mad? That was a caller earlier saying nobody ever heard of him. He is a national treasure, whatever our politics. Well, Jackie, he's a national treasure. That's going a bit further than I would go, but I would say that in an age when politicians are not respected, he does deserve respect. Peter says people should stop complaining about left-wing or right-wing people taking over any political party. If they weren't so apathetic and got involved with the parties, they could put a stop to it happening. Peter, that row going on right now, the Remainers in the Conservative Party are screaming blue murder, because Aaron Banks has said to people, let's all join the Tory party and get rid of Theresa May and make Boris PM. And what the Remainers, the Anna Subras, are worried that if a flood of Banks supporters joins her constituency, she could get deselected. So it is actually, there are so few people now that are actually members of our political parties that actually a determined group of people from outside can come in and pretty much take it over. It's happened with the Labour Party. Simon is a new caller from Derby. Simon, hi.
Hello, Nigel.
So, Field has gone. He has said some pretty tough things about the perception of the party being racist and anti-Semitic. He's called his local association thugs. Has he done the right thing?
Yeah, basically, he's done his bit. He's put his hands up and said, no, that's it. I can't do any more with this. It's so divisive. We're in a serious state. And if I was probably 20 years younger, I'd give you a good slapping. Sort of thing,
You think that's what he's saying, do you?
To be true for you, he's done his bit magnificently, I think. But when he sees what he's got in front of him, he thinks, well, no, I've done so much for so long, I don't think I can do anything with this.
Yeah, enough's enough.
This is a serious mess.
Would you vote for him, Simon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. People like that. It's like the other fella, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, up near Worsop, I'm Derbyshire sort of thing. Brilliant politician, called a spade a spade.
Skinner? Dennis Skinner or someone like that, or John Mann, or whoever. Anyway, Simon, listen, John Mann it probably is, yeah. Simon, thank you. One more caller on this is all I've got time for. Craig from Burton. Good evening, Craig.
Oh, hi, Nigel. We've spoke before.
You are the Labour man, aren't you?
I am, yes. I'm a Labour Party member.
Yep.
And Frank's assessment is entirely true. The Labour Party has become a party of thugs. The anti-Semitism is rife. And the accusations of bad faith against the chief rabbi, also against the former chief rabbi, also against Frank Field.
Yep.
It's a scary place to be, Nigel. And for me, I think the PLP should get together and call a no confidence vote, basically. And I think Jeremy would lose that.
But it's not going to happen, Craig, is it? It's not going to happen. And even if the MPs, because we had a leadership election, recently, even if the MPs had a vote of no confidence in Corbyn, they put it back to the party membership. As a Labour Party member, he'd get re-elected.
Yeah, that would happen. But however, what the PLP could do is introduce a private bill, not a private member's bill, a private bill to take the functions of the NEC and put them into the hands of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and that would basically remove the power of the membership, because the Labour Party needs to be put in...
Well, then you'd have civil war. Craig, let me ask you something. You're a Labour Party member. You're appalled by what's going on. Are you going to follow Frank Field out of the door?
Not quite yet.
All right, OK. I sense you're not far away. Craig, ring us again as the Labour saga continues to unfold. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. If you haven't heard, from Monday, I'll be starting at the earlier time of 6 p.m, following a new drive time show from Eddie Mair. At 10 tonight, it's Matt Stadlen. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much.